Right now, there is a battle happening inside you that has nothing to do with what you can see. It is the battle between distraction and awareness, between reacting to life and being led through it, between noise on the outside and guidance on the inside. And here is what most people never realize. The biggest decisions in life are not lost because there was no answer. They are lost because the answer was not noticed in time. Stay with this, because what you are about to hear will completely shift how you understand clarity, direction, and spiritual awareness from this moment forward. Praying in tongues is one of the most unique and deeply spiritual expressions of because it goes beyond the limits of human language and human understanding. In everyday communication, words are formed through the mind. You think, you process, and then you speak. But praying in tongues operates differently. It is not driven by intellectual reasoning or natural speech patterns. Instead, it is a form of spiritual communication that flows from the inner spirit, allowing a person to connect with God on a deeper level than ordinary conversation. Many people struggle with the idea of things they cannot fully understand. The natural mind always wants explanation, structure, and control. It wants to analyze everything before accepting it. But spiritual life does not always begin with understanding. In many cases, understanding follows experience. Praying in tongues is one of those experiences. For participation comes before full comprehension. When a person begins to pray in tongues, something significant happens internally. The focus shifts from mental effort to spiritual surrender. Instead of carefully choosing words, the person yields their speech to a higher flow. This surrender is important because it teaches the heart to rely less on natural ability and more on spiritual sensitivity. It becomes an exercise in trust, where a person is no longer depending on their own limited understanding to communicate, but is allowing a deeper spiritual expression to take place. This type of prayer also breaks the limitation of language. Human languages are powerful, but they are still limited. There are emotions that cannot be fully expressed in words. There are burdens that feel too deep for language. There are moments of worship, gratitude, or longing that go beyond vocabulary. Praying in tongues allows expression beyond those limitations. It becomes a way of communicating what the natural mind cannot fully articulate. Another important aspect of praying in tongues is that it shifts the focus inward, strengthening the inner spiritual life. Many people live primarily in their thoughts and emotions. Their decisions, reactions, and expectations are often shaped by what they see, feel, or think. But praying in tongues helps redirect attention away from external distractions and toward internal spiritual awareness. It strengthens the inner man, building a deeper sense of spiritual stability. Over time, this practice develops sensitivity. A person becomes more aware of spiritual impressions, more attentive to inner guidance, and more conscious of spiritual reality. This does not happen instantly, but gradually through consistent engagement. Just as physical exercise strengthens the body, consistent spiritual practice strengthens the inner life. Praying in tongues becomes part of that strengthening process. It is also important to understand that this form of prayer is not based on emotional excitement alone. While emotions may be involved, they are not the foundation. The foundation is faith and willingness to yield. A person may not always feel something dramatic when praying in tongues, but something deeper is still taking place. Growth in the spirit is not always immediately visible or emotionally intense, but it is real and ongoing. Another key aspect is that praying in tongues helps move a person beyond mental limitations in prayer. When praying only with natural understanding, it is easy to get stuck in repetitive thoughts or limited perspectives. People often pray about what they already know or what they can already see. But praying in tongues bypasses that limitation and allows prayer to flow beyond mental boundaries. It opens the door for deeper spiritual expression that is not restricted by human reasoning. This also creates a posture of humility. When a person prays in tongues, they are essentially acknowledging that their natural understanding is not enough on its own. They are choosing to depend on spiritual help rather than self-generated words. That humility strengthens spiritual openness, making the heart more receptive to guidance, correction, and growth. Another important effect of praying in tongues is consistency. Because it is not dependent on complex thinking or structured language, It can be practiced in many different moments during quiet times, during personal reflection, or even in moments of need. This accessibility helps build a continuous awareness of spiritual connection rather than limiting prayer to specific formal times. Over time, this consistency builds a deeper inner strength. The person becomes less easily shaken by external pressure because their inner life has been strengthened through repeated spiritual engagement. They are not only reacting to life from a natural standpoint, but also responding from a spiritually strengthened position. Ultimately, praying in tongues is about developing a deeper connection with God that goes beyond human limitation. It strengthens the inner man, builds spiritual awareness, and creates a life that is more sensitive to spiritual direction. And as this practice becomes consistent, it helps shape a believer who is not only informed spiritually, but also strengthened internally, able to stand firm and remain spiritually aware in every season of life. Now let's go deeper into something many people underestimate. Praying in tongues is not just a moment of prayer, it is a process that strengthens your inner spirit from the inside out. Most people focus heavily on their external life. They pay attention to what they see, what they feel, and what they experience in the natural world. But there is another part of a person that is often ignored, and that is the inner spiritual man. This inner part is where strength, sensitivity, peace, and spiritual awareness are developed. And praying in tongues is one of the ways that this inner life is built and strengthened over time. When a person consistently prays in tongues, something powerful begins to happen internally. It is not always dramatic or immediately emotional, but it is deeply transformative. The inner man begins to grow stronger, just like a muscle that is trained through consistent exercise. At first, you may not notice obvious changes, but over time, endurance increases, stability increases, sensitivity increases, and spiritual awareness becomes more developed. Think about physical exercise for a moment. When someone starts training their body, they do not become strong overnight. They build strength through repetition. Small efforts, repeated consistently, produce long-term results. In the same way, praying in tongues strengthens the inner life through consistency, not intensity alone. It is not about how emotional you feel in a single moment, but about the steady development that takes place over time. One of the most important results of this kind of prayer is spiritual sensitivity. Many people struggle in life not because they lack ability, but because they lack sensitivity. They miss direction. They miss warnings. They miss inner guidance. Not because it is not available, but because their inner awareness is not developed enough to recognize it. Praying in tongues helps train that inner sensitivity. As a person spends time in this form of prayer, they begin to become more aware of inner impressions. They begin to notice subtle spiritual nudges. They become more sensitive to peace or lack of peace in certain decisions. This is not based on guessing or emotional impulse. It is a deeper awareness that develops through consistent spiritual practice. Another important effect is inner strengthening during weakness. Every person experiences moments of discouragement, confusion, or emotional pressure. These moments can weaken a person's confidence and cloud their thinking, but praying in tongues helps strengthen the inner man during those times. It creates a kind of spiritual stability that is not easily shaken by external conditions. You may still face challenges, but your internal strength becomes greater than the pressure you are facing. This is why many people who develop a consistent prayer life often appear calmer under pressure. It is not because they have fewer problems. It is because their inner life has been strengthened to handle pressure differently. Another key truth is that praying in tongues builds spiritual endurance. Life is not always made up of short moments of difficulty. It often involves long seasons of waiting, testing, or uncertainty. During those seasons, many people lose strength mentally and emotionally because they are relying only on natural endurance. But spiritual endurance is different. It is built through consistent inner strengthening. When a person prays in tongues regularly, they are feeding and strengthening their inner man continuously. And that strength becomes important when external situations do not change quickly. It helps them remain steady instead of collapsing under pressure. Another powerful result is increased spiritual clarity over time. Confusion often comes when the mind is overloaded with natural thoughts, fears, and distractions. But as the inner life is strengthened, clarity begins to increase. Decisions become clearer. Direction becomes more recognizable, and internal confusion begins to decrease. It is not that life becomes problem-free. It is that the inner person becomes more capable of processing life in a stable way. Another important aspect is that praying in tongues builds consistency in spiritual discipline. Many people struggle with inconsistency in their spiritual life because they rely only on emotion or external motivation. But praying in tongues can become a simple, steady practice that keeps a person connected spiritually even when emotions are not strong. This consistency matters because spiritual growth is not built on occasional effort. It is built on repeated engagement. Over time, something deeper begins to form. The person becomes more spiritually aware in daily life, not just during prayer times. They begin to carry a sense of inner connection and awareness throughout their day. This does not mean they are perfect or always emotionally high. It means they are increasingly stable on the inside, and stability is powerful. Because when the inner life is strong, external pressure loses some of its ability to shake you. You become less reactive, more grounded, and more aware of spiritual direction. Ultimately, praying in tongues strengthens the inner spirit in a way that natural effort cannot fully achieve. It builds sensitivity, endurance, clarity, and stability over time. And as this inner strength grows, it begins to influence every area of life: how you think, how you respond, and how you walk through both challenges and opportunities with greater spiritual awareness and inner strength. Let's go. Staying spiritually charged is not an occasional experience, it is a maintained condition. Many people think spiritual strength works like a momentary feeling. They believe you pray, you feel strong for a while, and then life slowly drains that strength until the next prayer moment. But that is not the design of spiritual life. Intention is not to live from one emotional high to another. The intention is to live in a continuous flow of spiritual awareness, strength, and connection. Think about what happens when something is charged with energy. A device is not meant to be powered only once and then left to slowly die out. It is meant to remain connected to its source so that the energy is constantly replenished. In the same way, your inner spiritual life is meant to remain connected, refreshed, and strengthened consistently. When a person prays in tongues and spends time in spiritual communication, something happens beyond the surface level of awareness. It is not just an emotional experience. It is a process of continuous internal strengthening. And when that practice becomes consistent, the result is a spiritually charged life, not just occasional spiritual moments. Now understand this clearly. Spiritual dryness is rarely sudden. It usually happens gradually. It begins when spiritual practices become inconsistent. A person becomes busy. They become distracted. They begin focusing only on external responsibilities, and slowly, without noticing, their inner sensitivity begins to weaken. It is not that God has moved away, it is that attention has shifted away from spiritual connection. That is why staying spiritually charged requires intentional consistency. When a person continues in prayer, especially in a spiritual flow like praying in tongues, they are not just doing a religious activity. They are maintaining internal alignment. They are keeping their spirit active, aware, and sensitive. And over time, this creates a steady inner condition rather than a fluctuating experience. One of the most important effects of staying spiritually charged is clarity under pressure. Life is full of situations that create confusion. Decisions are not always simple. Emotions are not always stable. Circumstances are not always clear. But a spiritually charged person develops a deeper ability to remain steady in unclear situations. This does not mean they always have immediate answers. It means they are not easily overwhelmed by uncertainty. Their inner life remains active, even when external conditions are unstable. Another powerful effect is resilience. When someone is spiritually drained, even small challenges feel heavy. Minor setbacks feel overwhelming. Emotional pressure becomes difficult to manage. But when a person is spiritually charged, their internal capacity to handle pressure increases. They are not easily shaken by temporary difficulties. Because their strength is not coming only from natural ability, it is being continuously renewed from within. This is why consistency matters more than intensity. Many people try to get spiritually strong through occasional intense moments of prayer, but then neglect daily spiritual maintenance. While those moments are valuable, they are not enough on their own to sustain long-term spiritual strength. What builds stability is regular connection, repeated engagement, and consistent spiritual practice. Staying spiritually charged also increases awareness. A spiritually aware person begins noticing things that others overlook. They become more sensitive to timing, direction, and inner impressions. This is not about being overly emotional. It is about developing a quiet inner awareness that comes from a strengthened spiritual life. Over time, this awareness becomes part of how a person navigates life. They are not just reacting to external events. They are responding from an internally guided place. Another important truth is that spiritual strength is not meant to be stored for emergencies only. Many people only think about spiritual activity when they face problems. But spiritual life is meant to be continuous preparation, not emergency response. When you stay spiritually charged consistently, you are not scrambling for strength during difficulty. You are already strengthened before difficulty arrives. This changes how you face life. Instead of panic, there is stability. Instead of confusion, there is clarity. Instead of exhaustion, there is internal support. And all of this develops through consistent spiritual connection. Another key aspect is protection from spiritual dullness. Dullness happens when a person becomes disconnected internally. They may still function outwardly, but inwardly they lose sensitivity. Things that once felt spiritually significant begin to feel distant. But staying spiritually charged keeps that inner sensitivity alive and active. Keeps the heart responsive. It keeps the spirit engaged. It keeps awareness alive. And this is extremely important in a life where distractions are constant and attention is easily divided. Ultimately, staying spiritually charged is about maintaining a living connection, not a temporary experience. It is about living in a state where your inner life is continually strengthened, continually refreshed, and continually aware. And when that becomes your lifestyle, something powerful happens. You stop living from spiritual moments and you start living from spiritual stability. You are no longer dependent on occasional renewal. You are walking in consistent inner strength that shapes how you think, respond, and move through every season of life with clarity, resilience, and spiritual awareness. Let's go deeper into something that often gets overlooked but carries enormous spiritual weight. Spiritual gifts are not unlocked by curiosity but by alignment, surrender, and yieldedness. Many people are curious about spiritual gifts. They want to understand them, experience them, or see them in operation. But curiosity alone does not activate spiritual flow. You can be curious about something and still remain disconnected from it. You can study it, talk about it, even desire it, but still not walk in it. Why? Because spiritual gifts are not activated by mental interest. They are activated by spiritual alignment. Alignment means your inner life is positioned correctly. It means your heart is open, your will is surrendered, and your spirit is responsive. When a person becomes aligned spiritually, they are no longer resisting the flow of spiritual influence. Instead, they are available. And availability is one of the most important conditions for spiritual activation. Now understand this carefully. Spiritual gifts are not controlled like tools. They are expressed through cooperation. They are not something a person manipulates through effort. They are something that flows through a yielded life. And yieldedness means you are not trying to control everything through your natural understanding. You are allowing a deeper spiritual influence to work through you. This is where many people struggle. The natural mind wants control. It wants predictability. It wants to understand everything before it participates. But spiritual life often requires surrender before understanding. That means a person may not fully comprehend how everything works, but they choose to remain open, responsive, and willing. When a person prays in tongues and spends time in spiritual communication, something begins to shift internally. Their focus moves away from control and toward surrender. This is not weakness, that is spiritual positioning, because spiritual gifts operate most effectively in a heart that is not resisting but yielding. Think about it like this. If a flow is available but the channel is blocked, nothing can pass through. The issue is not the absence of flow. The issue is obstruction. In the same way, spiritual gifts are often not absent, they are simply not flowing freely because of internal resistance, distraction, or lack of alignment. Yieldedness removes that resistance. It creates space for spiritual expression. It allows sensitivity to increase. And it positions a person to respond rather than resist. Another important truth is that spiritual gifts are not primarily for personal display. They are for spiritual purpose, service, and direction. When a person approaches spiritual gifts with self-centered motivation, wanting attention, recognition, or superiority, it creates internal misalignment. But when the heart is focused on service, obedience, and spiritual sensitivity, alignment becomes much stronger. This is why humility is essential. Humility does not mean weakness. It means openness. It means the heart is teachable, responsive, and willing to be led rather than controlled by pride or ego. A humble heart is far more capable of spiritual sensitivity than a proud or self-reliant heart. As alignment deepens, something begins to change internally. The person becomes more aware of spiritual impressions. They begin to notice subtle direction. They become more sensitive to peace, conviction, or inner prompting. This is not imagination, it is the result of a life that is becoming spiritually tuned. Just like a radio must be tuned to the correct frequency to receive a clear signal, the inner life must be aligned to receive spiritual flow clearly. Misalignment creates static. Alignment creates clarity. Another key aspect of activation is faith. Faith is not just belief in theory, it is willingness to respond. A person may believe spiritual gifts exist, but still not operate in them because they are not willing to respond when prompted. Yielded faith is active faith. It listens. It responds. It moves when directed. And this is where practice becomes important. Spiritual sensitivity grows through engagement. The more a person spends time in prayer, especially in spiritual communication, the more familiar they become with inner leading. At first, it may feel subtle or unclear, but over time, recognition develops. The inner life becomes more responsive and more aware. Another important truth is that spiritual gifts are often awakened in environments of consistency, not occasional effort. A person who occasionally engages spiritually may experience moments of awareness, but a person who consistently lives in spiritual alignment develops deeper flow and stability. Consistency creates familiarity. Familiarity creates sensitivity. Sensitivity allows expression, and expression allows spiritual gifts to become more evident. But again, the foundation is always alignment. Without alignment, there may be interest but no flow. With alignment, even simple moments of prayer can become deeply significant because the heart is positioned correctly. Ultimately, unlocking spiritual gifts is not about trying harder, it is about yielding more deeply. It is about removing resistance, increasing sensitivity, and maintaining a posture of openness before God. And when a person lives in that state of alignment and surrender, spiritual gifts are no longer something distant or occasional. They become a natural expression of a spiritually responsive life flowing through a heart that is aligned, available, and continually yielded. Let's go deeper into something that many people overlook when they talk about spiritual growth. Faith is not just belief in what God can do, it is surrender of how you think it should happen. Most people are comfortable believing in God as long as they still try to control the outcome. They believe for answers, but they also want control over timing. They trust for breakthrough, but they still want to dictate the process. They ask for guidance, but they still hold tightly to their own understanding. And without realizing it, this mixture creates internal tension that slows spiritual development. Faith and control cannot fully operate in the same space. One requires trust, the other requires self-reliance. And the moment a person begins to truly grow spiritually, they begin to notice this internal conflict. There is a part of them that wants to trust completely, and another part that wants to manage everything. That tension is where real spiritual development begins, because surrender is not instant, it is learned. When a person prays in tongues and engages in consistent spiritual communication, something begins to happen in this inner struggle. The natural desire for control slowly starts losing its dominance, not because the mind disappears, but because the spirit becomes stronger in influence. The more a person yields spiritually, the less they feel the need to control everything mentally. This is why surrender is so closely connected to spiritual growth. Surrender does not mean passivity. It does not mean giving up responsibility or ignoring wisdom. It means releasing the illusion that you must control everything in order for things to work. It is the recognition that your understanding is limited, but God's understanding is not. And this shift is powerful because most anxiety comes from the need to control outcomes. Most frustration comes from resistance to timing. Most confusion comes from trying to figure out what is not yet revealed. But surrender begins to dissolve that internal pressure. Now listen carefully. Spiritual growth often feels uncomfortable at first because it challenges deeply rooted patterns of thinking. The mind is used to solving problems, analyzing situations, and predicting outcomes. So when faith calls for surrender, the mind resists because it feels like losing control. But in reality, it is not losing control, it is transferring trust. There is a difference between the two. Losing control creates fear. Transferring trust creates peace. When a person begins to truly trust God with outcomes, something shifts. Internally, they are still aware of challenges, but they are no longer emotionally dominated by them. They still make decisions, but they are no longer driven by anxiety. They still plan, but they are no longer enslaved to uncertainty. This is the beginning of spiritual maturity. Another important truth is that surrender creates clarity over time. It may seem counterintuitive, but the more a person releases control, the clearer their inner direction becomes. Why? Because control creates noise, fills the mind with overthinking, worry, and constant mental activity. But surrender quiets that internal noise and allows spiritual sensitivity to become more noticeable. This is where many people miss guidance. They are so busy trying to figure everything out that they cannot sense inner direction clearly. But when the mind becomes calmer through trust, awareness increases. Now let's connect this to faith in daily life. Faith is not only about believing for miracles, it is also about trusting God in uncertainty. It is trusting Him when answers are not immediate. It is trusting Him when timing is unclear. It is trusting Him when logic cannot fully explain what is happening. And that level of trust requires surrender, not occasional surrender, but consistent surrender. Every day presents new opportunities to either control or trust. Every decision becomes a moment where you either lean on understanding or release it. And over time, these small decisions shape your spiritual maturity. Another powerful effect of surrender is emotional stability. When a person is constantly trying to control outcomes, their emotions rise and fall with every change in circumstance. But when trust becomes stronger, emotional stability increases. The person is no longer emotionally controlled by every shift in situation because their foundation is not built on control, it is built on confidence in God. This is why surrendered faith produces peace even in uncertainty, not because uncertainty disappears, but because the need to control it weakens. And when that need weakens, peace begins to grow. Another important truth is that surrender deepens spiritual dependence. It shifts a person from self-reliance to God-reliance. Instead of constantly asking, "How can I fix this?" the heart begins to say, "I trust you to lead me through this." That shift is subtle, but it is transformative, because spiritual growth is not only about what you believe, it is also about what you release. And what you release determines how freely spiritual life can flow. Ultimately, faith that leads to spiritual growth is not just belief in outcomes. It is surrender of control, trust in timing, and confidence in direction that you do not fully see yet. And when a person begins to live in that place of surrender, something powerful happens internally. The pressure of control decreases, peace increases, sensitivity grows, and spiritual maturity begins to develop in a steady and lasting way. Let's go deeper into something that many people experience but don't always understand. Weakness, confusion, and spiritual dryness are not signs that you are disconnected forever. They are signs that you need strengthening from within. Every person goes through seasons where they feel spiritually low. There are moments when prayer feels difficult, moments when focus is weak, moments when clarity feels distant. And in those moments, many people begin to assume something is wrong with them. Permanently, they interpret temporary weakness as permanent failure. But spiritual life does not work that way. Weakness is not final. Confusion is not permanent. Dryness is not the end of growth. They are signals, not sentences. And this is where praying in the Spirit becomes so powerful, because it addresses the inner man directly, even when the mind feels unclear or the emotions feel unstable. When a person prays in tongues, they are not relying on mental clarity to connect with God. They are engaging a deeper spiritual flow that strengthens them from within. Think about physical exhaustion for a moment. When the body is tired, you don't abandon it, you restore it. You rest, you recover, you regain strength. In the same way, when the inner life feels weak or dry, it is not something to be condemned. It is something to be strengthened. Now listen carefully. Confusion often comes from overload. Too many thoughts, too many concerns, too many distractions, too much focus on external pressure. When the mind becomes overloaded, clarity begins to fade. It becomes difficult to discern direction. Even simple decisions can feel heavy. And in that state, many people try to solve confusion with more thinking. But overthinking does not create clarity, it increases pressure. Spiritual strengthening works differently. Instead of adding more mental effort, it shifts focus inward. It allows the inner man to be refreshed, strengthened, and realigned. This is why consistent spiritual engagement is so important. It creates internal stability that is not dependent on external conditions. Now consider spiritual dryness. This is one of the most misunderstood experiences. Spiritual dryness is often not a loss of connection, it is a loss of awareness. A person may still be connected spiritually, but their sensitivity has weakened due to distraction, fatigue, or inconsistency in spiritual practice. It feels like distance, but often it is dullness, and dullness can be restored. One of the ways restoration happens is through consistent prayer in the Spirit, because this form of prayer bypasses mental limitation and begins strengthening the inner life directly. It reconnects awareness. It reactivates sensitivity. It begins to awaken what has become quiet internally. At first, the change may feel subtle. You may not immediately feel different, but something deeper is happening. Strength is being rebuilt internally, even if emotions have not yet caught up. This is important to understand. Spiritual restoration is often gradual, not instant. Many people give up too early because they expect immediate emotional change. But inner strengthening is like rebuilding endurance. It takes consistency. It takes time. It takes repetition. Another powerful truth is that weakness often reveals dependence. When a person feels strong, they often rely on themselves. But when they feel weak, they become more aware of their need for spiritual strength. In that sense, weakness can become an invitation not to quit, but to lean deeper into spiritual connection. Confusion also has a purpose. It shows that natural understanding is not always enough. It reveals the limitation of human reasoning, and it creates an opportunity for deeper reliance on spiritual awareness rather than mental effort alone. Now here is something very important. Spiritual strength is not measured by how you feel in a single moment. It is measured by how quickly you can be restored when you feel weak. A spiritually strong person is not someone who never feels low. A spiritually strong person is someone who knows how to return to strength. They know how to reconnect. They know how to rebuild. They know how to be renewed internally. And that renewal often comes through consistent spiritual engagement. Over time, something powerful happens. The seasons of dryness become shorter. The moments of confusion become clearer. The periods of weakness become easier to recover from. Not because life becomes easier, but because inner strength becomes more developed. And that development is key, because spiritual maturity is not the absence of struggle, it is the ability to remain stable within it. So when weakness appears, do not interpret it as failure. When confusion appears, do not accept it as permanent. When dryness appears, do not assume disconnection. Instead, recognize it as a signal to be strengthened again from within. And as you consistently engage in spiritual communication, especially in prayer, something begins to rebuild inside you. Strength returns. Clarity returns. Sensitivity returns. Not all at once, but gradually and steadily. And over time, you begin to realize something powerful. You are not defined by moments of weakness. You are strengthened through them. As long as you know how to return to the source of inner renewal and remain connected long enough for strength to be rebuilt from within. Let's go deeper into something that completes this entire understanding of spiritual life. Living spiritually alert is not about reacting to life. It is about being guided from within before life demands a reaction from you. Most people live reactively. Something happens and then they respond. A problem appears and then they pray. Confusion arises and then they seek direction. Pressure increases and then they try to regain stability. In that way of living, spiritual awareness becomes something they turn to only after situations have already developed. But a spiritually alert life is different. It is not reaction-based. It is awareness-based. It is a life where the inner connection is active enough that direction, peace, and sensitivity are already present before situations escalate. Instead of constantly trying to catch up with life, a spiritually alert person learns to stay in step with spiritual guidance. Now listen carefully. Spiritual alertness is not emotional excitement. It is not hype. It is not constant intensity. It is a steady inner awareness that grows through consistent spiritual engagement, especially through prayer and yielding to the inner life. When a person consistently prays in the Spirit, something begins to develop internally. Their awareness becomes sharper. Their sensitivity becomes more refined. They begin to notice things earlier internally, not just externally. They become more aware of peace or lack of peace in decisions. They become more conscious of inner prompting that helps guide their direction. This is not imagination. It is trained sensitivity. Just like physical senses can become sharper through use and awareness, spiritual sensitivity also becomes sharper through consistent engagement. Now, think about how many mistakes in life happen not because people had no opportunity to know better, but because they were not spiritually alert enough in the moment of decision. They acted quickly without inner peace. They moved without clarity. They responded without sensitivity. And later, they realized something fell off, but by then the decision had already been made. Spiritual alertness helps reduce those moments. It does not eliminate all challenges, but it increases awareness before decisions are made, not just reflection after consequences appear. Another important truth is that spiritual alertness brings stability in uncertainty. Life is full of situations that do not provide immediate answers. Not everything is clear right away. Not every path is obvious. But when a person is spiritually alert, they are not dependent solely on visible clarity. They are guided by internal awareness that provides direction even when external information is incomplete. This creates a different kind of confidence. Not confidence based on full information, but confidence based on inner guidance. Now here is something very important. Distraction is one of the greatest enemies of spiritual alertness. When attention is constantly pulled in multiple directions, noise, pressure, responsibilities, information overload, the inner awareness becomes harder to recognize. It is not that it disappears, it becomes harder to notice. That is why consistent spiritual practice is essential. It brings the focus back inward. It quiets the noise. It strengthens internal awareness so that spiritual sensitivity is not drowned out by external pressure. Over time, something begins to change. You start recognizing patterns earlier. You become more aware of internal peace or disturbance. You begin sensing when something is not aligned even before you can fully explain why. This is spiritual alertness developing. Another key aspect of this lifestyle is responsiveness. A spiritually alert person is not only aware, they respond quickly to inner guidance. When there is peace, they move. When there is caution, they pause. When there is clarity, they proceed. When there is uncertainty, they wait. This responsiveness is what keeps them aligned, because awareness without response is incomplete. It is response that turns awareness into direction. Now understand this clearly. Spiritual alertness does not mean you never face challenges. It means you are not blindsided by them in the same way. You are more prepared internally. You are more stable in your responses. You are less easily shaken because your inner life is not disconnected from spiritual awareness. And as this develops, something powerful happens. Life becomes less chaotic internally even when externally things are. changing. You are no longer constantly reacting in panic or confusion. Instead, there is a steady inner guidance that helps you navigate. This is what it means to walk in spiritual awareness, not living from reaction, but from alignment. And when that alignment becomes consistent, your life begins to reflect a deeper stability. Decisions become clearer. Responses become steadier. Direction becomes more recognizable. And even in uncertain seasons, you are not lost in confusion because your inner awareness has been trained to remain sensitive, responsive, and spiritually alert in every situation you face. So as you move forward from here, don't just react to life, learn to recognize what is already being placed within you before life even demands a response. Because confusion loses its power the moment awareness increases, and pressure loses its authority the moment inner guidance becomes clearer. Stay sensitive, stay steady, stay spiritually aware, and you will begin to notice something powerful. You are no longer simply surviving situations as they come. You are being led through them with clarity, stability, and a quiet confidence that you are not walking blindly, but being guided from within every step of the way.